want to talk about experts, and another reason why you shouldn't trust them, or certainly shouldn't expect too much from them. Back in the 1970s, when I was in graduate school, I think it was a Sunday, I was watching Bill Buckley's old show, Firing Line. And on this particular show, he had the head of the Council of Foreign Relations, the CFR. And it's a very prestigious group, invitation only. And one of the main things they did that they're best known for is publishing the foreign policy journal, Foreign Affairs. Now, Foreign Affairs is like the journal in foreign affairs. In fact, when I started reading it back in the early 70s, it was the only journal like it. There was nothing else like it. Then along came another one called Foreign Policy, and then a few others. But Foreign Affairs is still the most prestigious of all journals. It's really something to get an article in there. During the show, Bill Buckley asked the head, I forget what his name was, if someone had been reading Foreign Affairs in the 1930s, would they have seen World War II coming? Now, I immediately thought, I know what the answer to this is, yes, because in my reading on American foreign affairs, which was one of my main fields in graduate school, I had run across innumerable articles cited from foreign affairs from the 1930s, which had warned about Hitler, warned about the Japanese in the Pacific, warned about Mussolini, warned about threats to the Jews, warned about all these things. Surely somebody reading foreign affairs would have seen all these things coming. But the guy said, I don't know. So I thought, I was taking a course in U.S. foreign policy. We had to come up with an idea for some sort of paper. And I thought, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll go back and look at foreign policy. Now, foreign policy started publishing during the Versailles negotiations in 1919. That was when the first issue had come out. And it's still published today. So I came up with this proposal that I was going to look at every issue of Foreign Affairs. And usually there's 4 issues with a bunch of articles in them and book reviews. Sometimes there's more than 4. I guess they had a backlog of articles. They put out like a 5th edition for winter, Christmas or some shit. And I'd go through every one from 1919, when they started publication, till 1942, figuring that articles written right before Pearl Harbor might not have shown up until the 1942 edition, because there's always a long delay in publication. And I went to my professor, who then was Waldo Heinrichs, noted specialist in American foreign affairs. And we went over it, and he made a couple suggestions, and that decided that's what I was going to do. And it was one of the more interesting papers that I ever wrote. And unfortunately, I lost it. I don't know whatever happened to it. I've often thought if I ever find it, it may be buried somewhere, maybe I update it and release it, because I think it was really interesting. And it's looking back at it today from a perspective of the period we're in now with the global war against Islamic jihadism, it's even more interesting. Because what I found, to my surprise, was that if you had read Foreign Affairs, you would not have seen World War II coming. Nope. That's not what you would have thought. You might have thought that, because there were articles that in retrospect were prescient. But you have to understand, for every article they ever published that said Hitler was a threat to the Jews in Germany and potentially in other places in Europe, they expanded, there was always an article that said he wasn't. For every article that said the Japanese posed threats in East Asia, there would be an article saying that they weren't. For every article that pointed to Mussolini's misadventures around the globe, use of chemical weapons in Ethiopia and things like that, there was another article that said he wasn't a threat to anything. He was actually a good friend of the West. I mean, they even published an article where the guy continually downplayed Hitler's attacks on the Jews as just political positions. Once he was in power, now he was in power, it would start to fade away. They drop it. And he had said he actually had it on the record from an inside source in the German government that Hitler was actually contemplating appointing a Jew as the Minister of Finance. And they published this thing. I mean, somebody actually, like some editor actually believed that, yeah, maybe Hitler would put a Jew in charge of finance. I mean, we know they're all good with money. I mean, it never dawned on them that there's probably some Nazi playing a joke on this asshole, what today they'd call trolling, and that he just didn't get it. he didn't get that the Nazi was just being, being a nasty SOB. So instead it comes out as some sort of, scholarly finding. And I realized when I got done, the whole thing was like that. What they had was a nice editorial balance. There was an article saying Hitler was a bad guy. There was an article Hitler was a good guy. There was an article saying, the Japanese were raping Manchuria. There was an article saying, no, the Japanese weren't doing that. There was an article saying Hitler was going to take the Sudetenland because he was a nasty, aggressive SOB. There was an article saying, no, the Czechs had mishandled the Sudetenland and they deserved that the Sudeten Germans should go back to Germany, yada, yada, yada. And the whole thing was like that. So if you read Foreign Affairs and you read everything, you would have been totally confused. You would have had no idea that World War II was coming. You had no idea what was going to happen in the globe in a couple of years. Unless you were picky and you only read certain ones, but then you would have already known that or you wouldn't have been doing that. Editorial balance, or they were too afraid to take an editorial position because they didn't want to be proved wrong. I don't know, however you want to deem it. But my point is, that's what we have today. If you think that if something terrible is coming, there's a possibility that something horrible is going to happen, and the global war against Islamic jihadism, which has been going on now, depending on how you want to start counting, since 2001, since 1998, since the 1920s, since the 7th century, however you want to count it up. If you think we might be headed for something horrible, God forbid, do not expect the foreign policy establishment to warn you that it's coming, because they'll never do that. They'll give you an article that says it might be coming, but then they'll balance it with an article that says it might not be coming. So you'll never know what's coming. Whatever we're going to get hit with down the road, whether it's something horrible or something very good or something in between, you have no idea. Because these people will never tell you. They'll never take a decision and say, this is a danger, we've got to make sure people understand that. They won't do that. They don't do that. It's different than saying it's fake news. It's not fake news. It's, in many ways, it's no news. I mean, it's information, but they didn't have a narrative in those days, or the narrative was they weren't going to take a position. Today, of course, it's even worse, because today they would only be giving you the other side. There is no war coming. There's nothing to fear. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Don't lose any sleep. You need to worry about some other group. But it's really bad. And it was really disappointing when I went back, because as a matter of fact, I stopped reading Foreign Affairs after that, because I realized, I wasn't getting anywhere. Because when I went back and I looked, even when I looked at the more recent things during the Cold War, it was, yes and no, yes and no, yes and no, yes and no. Forget it. They're not going to let you know anything. And even though they're the experts, don't expect them to keep you informed, because they're not going to keep you informed. Whatever's going to come is going to blindside us, just like it blindsided people on the 7th of December, 1941. And only in retrospect will we be able to go back and see, see, so-and-so warned us about this. So-and-so warned us about this. But so-and-so's warning was always, lost in the noise, lost in the concept of editorial balance, lost in not wanting to take a position, not wanting to take a position where if things went the other way, they could be proven to be wrong, and people would say, Foreign Affairs drove us toward war, or Foreign Affairs didn't know what they were talking about. Because as it was, people could go back and say, aha, look at all these articles. See, they knew what was coming. But what they don't tell you is, for each of those articles where they were telling you what was coming, there was another set of articles telling you that it wasn't coming. And in other words, what they were telling you wasn't anything at all. But don't expect the experts will let us know the next time there's a global conflict coming, because they won't.